what's going on, guys? Welcome back. Today I'm doing introduction to penetration testing. Now, before you click off, because I know this box is super simple to complete, one thing I want to tell you is this is one of the most important boxes, in my opinion, if you're trying to be a pen tester, to watch this video for. The reason I say that, and it might sound dramatic, but I know so many students that are asking questions like, I want to be a pen tester, or how do you be a pen tester, or, you know, I'm finished with school and I just got this cert, I just got CPTS and and I'm going to be a pen tester and all this stuff. And they don't understand any of this. And that is one of the biggest problems that you see when you watch people go into interviews and they'll be like, I have OSCP and CPTS and all this stuff, and I can't get a call back, or I go in there and I interview, but they just laugh me out of the room or whatever. This is why, because you don't actually understand a pen test. You understand how to pass a cert. And while this is the path to pass the CJCA, I think that's the name of the cert, it still is so important that you add the context to this. And that's one of the biggest gripes I have about Hack the Box. I've talked about it before, but it's one of my biggest gripes about Hack the Box is, and it's kind of part of the platform, the design they have to do, but we'll get into it, is just the fact that it's not realistic to an enterprise infrastructure. And there's not a lot big places like this can do, because it would cost a fortune to just keep a live range up all the time that they're also going to be resetting when people mess with it and stuff. So I get it. But all right, so let's go ahead and hop into it. So very first thing, this is one of the last ones I can do actually on this path, on the CJCA cert path. So I think there's this one, and then there's one more maybe that I can actually do because they're fundamental, and then we'll take the cert and you guys will see, you know, my review and my thoughts on it. So first things first is, what is penetration testing? Well, it's ethical hacking where we legally mimic cyber attacks. So you legally are allowed to hack into something, right? And then you report the results. Now, we're going to talk about all of those things, why we do it, all that stuff. And most people feel like they know why, but most people don't realize when they do penetration testing, you could be the best pen tester in the world, but if you're really bad at other things like report writing, compliance standards, understanding the goal of the business rather than the goal of your pen test, understanding big picture, you're really not that valuable, because I can hire pretty much anybody to give me at least the top low-hanging fruits, right? Which is what really they're going to fix. So let's go ahead and get into it. So we know what the definition is, right? A penetration test is a unique type of security assessment that goes beyond automated scanning and vulnerability identification. So we're going to talk about that. Starts with recon and information gathering. So this is the process that they go through, right? They go through recon, vulnerability assessment, exploitation, post-exploit, and then reporting. Now, the only thing really different if you look at this versus, and you've seen this probably in Pentest in a nutshell, I think this exact diagram was there, but the big difference in this penetration testing process versus like an attack methodology is, one, the recon phase, and then two is really the, there's no actions on objectives, right? The action on objective is the post engagement. So if you're following some other processes or frameworks, that's really kind of the difference. So we have pre-engagement, right? This is like your contracts, your negotiations, your all that stuff. If you're a new penetration tester or getting into penetration testing, you probably won't be a part of this conversation a whole lot. You're probably not going to be negotiating the contract and talking about time, man hours, scheduling, all that stuff. But then you might be involved in the information gathering. Once you have that information gathering, you do your vulnerability assessment, right? Let's find the vulnerabilities we're looking for, right? Okay, then we exploit those vulnerabilities, and that's right here. And you notice they all call back to information gathering. The reason for this is because you might exploit something, and then now you have further access into the network, or you found a new host or something, and you need to do some more information gathering and data. So you're always going back to that information gathering. Personally, I think this is a really confusing diagram. I think you could make this a lot nicer, but I understand what they're trying to say, right? You're going to do that vulnerability assessment, and then you notice it goes to post-exploitation, and the reason might be maybe once you exploit, you do your vulnerability assessment, and now you're into the next stage, right? You're already exploiting something else or doing something post-exploit. You're laterally moving, you're doing all that, right? Then you have a lateral movement, then you have a proof of concept. So all of this feeds into your proof of concept, which is you doing the attack, and then you're going to report that in your post engagement. So you're going to show, they call it a proof of concept. You actually did the attack. The difference is you're not attacking, right? It's really the main difference is just the intent behind it. Okay, so the primary goal of penetration testing can be broken down into 3 categories. So a couple of things, I don't necessarily agree with this, but I understand what they're saying. Evaluation of organization's cybersecurity posture, right? Testing organization's defensive measures, and operational and financial impact risk assessment. Now, I don't agree that that's the primary goals of penetration testing, because I can tell you I have done a lot of penetration tests for companies that their primary goal was to pass a compliance standard. That's not on here, right? Now, could it fall in one of those categories, right? Am I evaluating their security? Sure, but that's not their goal. So while I believe that this makes sense, what they're saying, I believe the actual goal should be up to the business, and that's what you should be providing. I do not believe, and I find it actually, most people, where they're not very good at pen testing, is actually they're pretty good at hacking. They're not very good at understanding the business side, meaning they go to a business, the business says, I just want to check off this box, and they go, okay, cool, I'll do it out of the box. Here's my pen test, blah, 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 and they hand it off to you. Is that really helpful? Not really. Not really. They check their box, and that's what they want, right? But you could add a ton more value if you understand the business goal and say, hey, are you going to actually fix these? Are you just trying to check the box? If so, then why don't I just give you a cookie cutter assessment? And they're going to go, what? Wait a minute. And then you say, your goal shouldn't be to just check a box, right? That's not my goal as a pen tester. And you're going to raise some eyebrows doing this, but you want to improve, in my opinion, if you're a cybersecurity professional, your goal should be to improve the profession, regardless of what position you're in, whether it's blue team, red team, whatever. And that might sound altruistic or stupid, but I truly believe that. If you can improve somebody, you're improving the cybersecurity profession as a whole. That stops attackers, right? Even if you're just a piece of it, if you're a piece of it on every organization, you stop the attackers. That's the whole point. It takes everybody. It can't take one person. Okay, so in detail, these categories include, but are not limited to, identifying security weaknesses. We know that. Validating security controls. So validating security controls. So an example might be, hey, we just put this in place. Can you check if it worked? Perfect. You put it in place. I tried to attack it. It doesn't work now. We're good. Testing, detection, and response capabilities. So maybe I'm doing a pen test, but I'm not telling my blue team, and I'm trying to see how they respond and see if they actually know how to stop an attack, right? Assessing real-world impact by simulating real-world scenarios, right? So this is a lot of times what you see, red team engagements, stuff like that, where they're going to be doing, hey, here's a real live attack that happened, simulate it in your environment. You know, you're going to probably have to pretend that someone got in, that type of stuff, do assumed breach and all that. But once you do, hey, what's the impact? Once someone's in this environment, how bad can it be, right? And that's what you're looking at. Prioritizing remediation efforts. So if I come and say, hey, as a pen tester, come in, attack my network, and you lay out all these vulnerabilities, and I look and I go, oh, you got in using this one, but you found these other ones, but you got in using this one. Maybe that's the one I should fix first, because that seemed to be your easiest method in. Compliance, that's what we just talked about. Enhancing security awareness. A lot of times you tell people security issues, like a lot of security professionals bring it up. They're like, hey, I found this, whatever. And people are like, yeah, it'll wait till later. But as soon as it's on paper, as soon as it's there, it brings up big awareness, because that's where you start running into fines and stuff if you're not fixing that stuff that's actually been assessed. Patch management, if you want to verify that there's patches, that your patch management system is doing well, a pen tester can look for vulnerable machines for sure. Testing new technology, so if a new system gets implemented and you're like, hey, we don't know, we implemented it the best way we know how, we think it's secure, I can come in and try and test it. Provide baseline for security improvements, right? A lot of times, if companies just get new business or something, they have to now be compliant to something else. They may not have a baseline. They may not know where they're at. So you bring someone in, you say, do the pen test. That's your baseline. Hey, I know we're here. Next year, we'd like to be here. And next year, we'd like to be here and here and here and here, and keep going, right? All right, types of pen tests. We have our black box. That means, hey, you don't know anything about the company, quote unquote, right? It's just as if an attacker would do it. Now, I hate I'm not a big black box testing fan, because it's not realistic. The reason I say that is because unless you're going to pay me for like 3 months work, which you're probably not going to, it's not realistic, because an attacker doesn't spend a week enumerating your environment and OSINT and doing all that stuff, trying to learn about you from the internet and then go attack you. They spend, if there's opportunistic attacks, but if you're talking about a real targeted attack, they spend a long time. So are they going into it black box? Are they going into it with no information? No, they're going into it with a shitload of information, because they spend a long time doing their due diligence and digging. Now, unless you're going to pay me the same time frame that an attacker spends on you, then you're not going to get the same results. So, black box testing, not really my favorite, but it has its uses for sure. White box testing, hey, you have full access. So here's an account, here's a machine, here's everything you need, full access, do whatever you need to do, and let us know where vulnerabilities exist. A lot of times you kind of get in the gray box testing, which is where most people are, where you have limited internal access. A lot of this is usually like an assumed breach pen test. So an example would be, hey, here's your IPs, right? And some people say like, well, you can't have I've heard the argument like you can't have black box testing because you have to, know the IPs. You have to know the IPs to stay in the scope so you don't accidentally just spread through multiple people's networks. So I understand that argument, but gray box testing is where most people sit. You come in, they give you an account, and they do assumed breach. What that means is, hey, assume you got somebody's account. What could you do? A lot of times people say, oh, that's kind of cheating or whatever. What's the number one way people get in? Phishing, vishing, social engineering, right? So if that's the number one way, and we see it over and over and over and over and over again, people social engineer their way into companies. It happens almost daily at this point to large companies. Why do you want me to sit here and social engineer you guys and spend, again, for the sake of time and money, it's going to cost you maybe a month, because I'm going to recon your environment. I'm going to figure out who you talk to, what you do, all that stuff. And then I'm going to spend the money, and you're going to be paying me this whole time. Or we can assume that that's probably someone's going to get in. And when they do, now let's worry about what happens, right? And that's usually what people do. They say, oh, okay, so got it. It'll cost me $50,000 to hire you for, a month, or we can do this for a week and just give you access, and assume that the way you got in is the way that most people get in, right? Now, some people might argue, well, that's not realistic. You can argue that. I understand your argument, but I just don't agree with it, because if someone wants in and they target you, they'll get in. It is what it is. So you also have physical security evaluations, assessing basically, can I get into the building? Can I get physical access to a machine? Can I get stuff like that? During unauthorized access, the team documented numerous security violations, sensitive documentation being exposed. So there's companies out there that especially like military and stuff like that, government, they'll have sensitive compartmentalized information. So these types of things, maybe you have like sensitive documents that are confidential that you can't have out, and they're just laying on the desk and stuff like that. So if someone physically gets access, that's just as bad as getting access to the computer, and et cetera. So there's those types of things. External testing, this is focusing on things that are externally facing. Don't worry about internal. The main reason here is saying, hey, we're trying to keep people out internally right now. We want to assess where we're at on that. We will do another assessment for the internal piece. Internal testing, this is, hey, you're inside our network already. This is where the real rubber meets the road. This is where most issues rise, and this is where attackers just go nuts, is inside the network. Most attackers, once they get inside your network, they spread, and that's where it's dangerous. That's where you can start identifying, detecting, all that stuff. So which type of penetration test do we simulate with no prior knowledge? Black box. All right. Areas of domain, network infrastructure, web apps, mobile apps, cloud infrastructure, physical, wireless, and software. Now, one thing I'll say is you're probably not going to run into a whole bunch of mobile application pen testers. You might. I'll say you don't run into a bunch of them because it's not as on demand. Most of them, like Android, Apple, they have them, but You're not going to I'm not going to hire you for my company to pen test my phones. Like, not typically. Web apps. So funny enough, this is where you see most people get started because it is easier, and you see most people actually in today's world pushing for this. They're asking, how do I become a web app pen tester? How do I do this? And it's because they see this as more of a need. The reality is there is more web app pen tests being done because that's external facing. But this network infrastructure, if you read it here, it's one of the most fundamental areas of pen testing. This is, in my opinion, if you say I'm a web app pen tester, nothing against that person, but you are less valuable to me than somebody that's a real network pen tester, network infrastructure pen tester. And the reason for that is because I can find a ton of people that can do web app pen testing, because really all I'm worried about is the OWASP top 10. I am worried about some of the other stuff, but I'm worried about that stuff. But most web app pen testers, even once they get past the web app, they don't really know what to do. So it's not as valuable. Whereas a network infrastructure person might get in and they can just run havoc, right? And that's what I'm looking for. So the network infrastructure pen testing is fundamental. It is what you need. This is why pen testing is not a entry-level career, because you need to understand network infrastructure. That is not easy. That takes a long time to understand and fully operate within. You can see there's port scanning, service enumeration, analyzing network protocols, right? So an example of why this takes a long time, right, is people use Nmap all the time. You guys are probably all familiar with Nmap. What you typically see happen is you see people go, yeah, I know how to use Nmap, and then they run Nmap against something, and it either gets caught, blocked, whatever, instantly. And they're like, Nmap's not really that useful because it just always shows blocked. That's because you don't really understand what you're doing. What I mean by that is, what if I go inside a company? What if I start in the network? Okay, and I run Nmap. Will it get blocked? Will they get alerted? Maybe. What if I run it in, what if I load it in RAM and run it? Now what? Does it get blocked? Maybe. Probably doesn't get blocked, probably runs, but what about all the port scanning? Well, what if I just do 2 or 3 ports that I'm using just for lateral movement? Probably not going to get blocked, right? So Nmap is actually an unbelievably useful tool, but people only know how to use it the way they were taught on something like Hack the Box and Try Hack Me, and they don't think of that stuff, such as I can run it in memory. I can do 1 port at a time. I can do different types of scans to be stealthier. I can do change the user agent. I can change all this other stuff to make it very stealthy. And so understand that that's what you typically see with web app pen testers is they understand web apps pretty well, but everything sits on infrastructure. So what that means is once you pass the web app, you got to know the rest of it. Otherwise, I'm not going to hire you for a pen test. I'm going to hire you to come in, assess this web app, this web app, this web app. That's it. I don't want you to spread through my network, right? So while there's nothing wrong with web app pen testing, I think it's a great entry point for people. I really do. Understand that if you're just jumping to web app pen testing, you're skipping all the network infrastructure, and you're actually going to really struggle when you try to get into pen testing. Okay, mobile app, again, mobile app security testing. You're going to see this typically by people that make mobile phones and apps, right? A lot of times you'll see people, especially if there's companies that have like mobile apps or whatever, typically they're going to have 1 or 2 mobile apps. You might have a company that makes mobile apps. That's their whole thing, and they'll do it, but you're not typically going to have a ton of mobile app pen testers, just because a lot of times it goes through this very similar testing as a regular web app. The difference is it's on a mobile phone, right? Cloud infrastructure security testing, again, same thing. It's cloud infrastructure versus network infrastructure. It still all sits on a network or on a network infrastructure. The difference is cloud infrastructure, a lot of times it's serverless, it's APIs, it's all that stuff. Very, very similar. The difference is just where's it sit, right? So if I hire you to do a SaaS solution, that software as a service, right? That's just going to sit on your servers and you're going to host it. It's still sitting on a server. It's still running on hardware. It's still doing that stuff, but it's all in your environment. I don't have to worry about it. You're taking that risk, right? Physical security and testing and social engineering. So this is exactly what it sounds like. Physical security. I'm going to try to get in your building. Social engineering. I'm going to try to walk through and see, can I call you guys and get my user account reset, right? Like that's an easy one. Can I call and say, hey, I'm Joe Schmo. I work here. I'm trying to reset my password, and the help desk says, yeah, sure. Let me reset it for you. Here you go, right? Wireless network security testing. This one's pretty self-explanatory, right? You're taking Wi-Fi, RFID, all that stuff, and you're going to actually test that. An example would be like, hey, I have Wi-Fi. Let's say we have Wi-Fi sitting here. We have maybe we have our own cell tower for some reason. Maybe we're a company with cell towers. Like that's all wireless. Anything wireless can be involved in this. Software testing. So again, this is the actual software, right? So this is the code. Most of the time, any development process this is part of the development process. So you might have regular intervals of testing, but you're typically it's going through its own process as it's getting developed, so that security is not testing it after development, because then you might have to go, hey, you got to remove everything because it's such a security problem. So which domain of the testing is most fundamental? Network infrastructure testing. Let's keep it moving. Penetration test benefits. Okay, so we're going to talk about these over here where it says, where was it? I can't remember where it was. Utilization of penetration testing results. But some of the biggest things is shaping security, right? So without a penetration test, unless your security professionals are really good in explaining everything to the executive leadership at all times, strategic thought process is really hard to do with lack of information. What I mean by that, your C-level executives can't make decisions to help security if they don't know the problems. So, for instance, if you give them a really good pen test report and it says you have huge flaws here, 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 what do you think strategically they're going to say, okay, we need to change this, this, and this. Maybe it's going to take 5 years. What do we do? Well, they have to start making those decisions now and building it out. And if you're not doing that, you're going to struggle down the road. And so the pen test reports really help with this strategically, because you can see as every year you do a pen test, your results get better, better, better. And maybe you have new holes, things like that. You start to prioritize where you're going to put security budgeting and funding and resources and et cetera. Business reputation is a big one. One of the big things is if you are not doing pen tests and you're legally required to, that's going to hurt your business, because you're going to get fines, for one, by compliance, but two, your business reputation gets harmed. If you don't know, when you go to do business with somebody and you're another business, almost every business looks at you and then evaluates you. Are you safe to do business with? Which sounds silly, but third-party supply chain attacks is one of the number one ways attackers are doing things right now. So it makes total sense, right? I'm not doing business with you unless I trust that you're secure. How do I trust that you're secure? Well, you're getting pen tests done annually. You're compliant with all your standards. You have SOX 2 reports, etc. Proactive. So this is where I think you should be, but not everybody is, and that is, hey, maybe we are compliant. Maybe we do have good pen test results. Maybe we do have all this stuff, but we still want to proactively improve. How do we do that? Well, a couple of ways. One, you can look at the pen test report and see where's your smaller gaps that you can still fill. The other thing is you can also do things like, this is things that I've done, is when I've had pen tests done for companies, right? I've asked straight up the pen testers, hey, can you send me the methodology and the attacks and all that stuff that you tried to do, even if they failed? And they will, typically. And the reason I do that is because, I see what they're trying to do here. Okay, they didn't get in, but I know I'm a good enough pen tester that I can go, okay, but maybe if they tried this and this, and they probably would have tried that if they were given more time. And so I go, let's start preparing, because next year, if we have the same people do it, they're probably going to try this other thing. Let's start getting ahead of that. Let's start trying to be proactive about our approach, right? Regulatory requirements, if you don't know, if you have PCI data, which is payment card industry, if you have HIPAA data, which is health industry, if you have if you're ISO 2701, GDPR, which is Europe, if you have any of these things, right? If you're compliant to any body, that means legally you have to meet a certain standard. And if you don't, they can fine you. They can do all kinds of stuff. So the point is you have to do this. So if you have to meet regulatory requirements, you have to do this. It doesn't matter what you want. So go ahead, knock it out, right? Cost-effective security investment. It is one of the best cost-effective security investments in my opinion, because if I went to your security professionals right now in your organization, and they're not pen testers, and I said, tell me where your security vulnerabilities are, they're probably going to go to your scanner, your vulnerability assessment, something like that, and say, here they are. Then I go to have a pen test do it. They're going to find probably all new things. And the reason is you don't know some of these things exist unless an attacker takes advantage, because you're not assessing security that way. It's not normal to always be offensively assessing your company. Now, you should be doing red team engagement and stuff like that. But what I'm saying is it's not normal to be doing full pen tests at all the time. So you want to get this second set of eyes. The other thing that you see happen a lot is people really close to the industry and to the business end up overlooking things because maybe they engineered it one day or 10 years ago or whatever, and it's their baby, so they don't look at it the same way and stuff like that. So you want to be aware of that. Business continuity and reputation protection, we talked about that. It helps business organizations address potential points of failure before they impact business, which is very true. Validation of security controls, right? Several vulnerabilities, although minor, could have been exploited if left unchecked. So this is something you see a lot, is you see multiple small vulnerabilities like lows or mediums get chained together, and then they get in that way. Well, on a vulnerability report, it actually looks like they just, you have 4 lows. We'll get to those when we get to those. But if you're a pen tester, you go, I can take those 4 lows and chain them all together, and now I just got in. That should be critical because I shouldn't be able to get in, right? But you have to chain them together, and you have to know how. That's something that pen testers can do, and vulnerability assessment people usually aren't doing that. So they're usually not even taking it that far at all. They're just taking it to the vulnerability report, and that's it. Competitive advantage. In today's security-conscious business environment, having a strong security program is vital. Not only vital, an example would be, look at CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike had the CrowdStrike incident that everyone's aware of, I think last year. That wasn't even a security incident. Go look at the stock prices. Their stock dropped immediately, dramatically, right? What do you think their competitors' stock prices did? Start going up. Why? Because there's people start going, well, I'm not using CrowdStrike anymore. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use this, and blah. Since then, CrowdStrike's bounced back and done just fine. But keep in mind that that's a huge competitive advantage, right? They probably had to let people go for it. It was probably a big deal, right? Compliance and pen testing. So these are the compliance requirements that you're looking at. I'm not going to go through them. If you guys want to read them, you should know them. And when I say you should know them, I don't mean like go through and know every SOC 2 control. Like those reports are huge. You don't know every SOC 2 control. I'm just saying make sure you know, like, hey, we have payment card data, we have credit card data in our environment. We need to be compliant to PCI, etc. So compliance-focused penetration testing methodology. So what this means is when you have a compliance requirement that you're trying to meet for the penetration test, and it's specific, a lot of times those actual frameworks and standards will lay out like what they need from a penetration test. And so, and most penetration testers know this, and so they will actually give you a report in the format that you can provide to the regulatory compliance people. All right, common challenges in compliance testing. Here's the big one: scope management, balancing the need for comprehensive testing with compliance requirements. So what that means is a lot of times the compliance requirements can be very, very in depth especially if you're far behind. And so you might not have time to actually get a very deep test. You might say, I have to meet all these requirements. And the tester's like, well, that'd take us like 3 weeks. And you're like, well, I'm only paying for a week. So what do you want to do? And so you're like, well, focus on the compliance requirements. Don't worry about like taking the attack further, right? And you see that quite a bit. You see that with like, you get a penetration testing report and they're like, hey, we got into here we probably could have kept going, but we were running out of time, so we went to go check other avenues to make sure we're getting you guys a broad spectrum. But we probably could have taken over this part and this part and this part, right? Okay, ethics of penetration testing requires strict ethical standards. This is obviously true. So one of the core ethical principle, do no harm and confidentiality. So one of the things that I see people not understand is Kali Linux. So many people use Kali Linux and don't understand it. What I mean by that is I can't tell you how many people I've seen go, I like Kali Linux, but then it got an update and now nothing works and I hate it. Kali Linux is designed as a live system, meaning it is designed for you to spin up, do a penetration test, and completely delete and never use that again. And then spin it up and do it again and delete it. It is literally designed intentionally not to update. What I mean by that is when the new update comes out, guess what? That new update, they've tested all the tools on that new update. They did not test all the tools on that new update with what you have on your old system. It's not meant as a daily driver. It is meant specifically designed as a penetration testing box. So you spin it up, you can do all of your pen test, and then you delete it because confidentiality is the next big piece, right? You're going to find stuff when you're doing a pen test that you probably shouldn't have access to. When I say you shouldn't, I mean like if you are a normal person working there. For instance, salaries, social security numbers, credit cards, passwords, usernames, all that stuff. You can't ever share any of that. You can't ever tell a soul, right? So what's the easiest way to do that? Delete it all and never speak of it again. It's super easy. You usually have an NDA, which you can see here. They have proper written authorization. This is an absolute requirement. They call it a get out of jail free card. But what it is it is a written authorization by someone that is authorized to tell you that you can do this, so that when someone comes, because sometimes companies don't tell people about pen tests, including physical security tests, all that stuff. When somebody comes and tries to arrest you or something, you have a proof. You know, it's usually a document, and you have proof. Hey, I was legally allowed to do this. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Professional integrity. Immediate accountability arise when issues arise. I can tell you I have had to fire pen testers mid-pen test because they didn't have integrity. I've seen where a pen tester made a mistake, ran a script or something, and it actually went way past the scope. And then when everyone comes crying, they're like, oh, I didn't do that. And it's like, I can see what you do. You know what I mean? If you have it structured properly, it's not hard to see who's doing what. And so when that happens, you go, well, I can't have someone without integrity. So professional integrity is huge. Data handling, data extraction. Usually you don't remove the data. So like, let's say I display a password. You usually don't remove it. What you would do is you'd actually hide it and then display that you could see it. An example of this would be, hey, I found a database. I have access to the database. I'm not going to list the whole database and then exfil it and then give it to them because they know it's the database, is what's in the database. I'm going to show a snippet and say, look, I can see everything in this database. So you don't need to extract the data usually. Safeguard any data gathered during the test. So it's your responsibility. If you have all that data on your machine, you need to protect it as well. You're the one that's accessing someone else's information. Legally, yes, but if you're not protecting your own, an example of this might be you have a laptop, you're accessing this sensitive information, and you don't even have a password on your laptop. Someone steals it, now they have access to all this business stuff, right? That's a big problem. And then personal use is obvious, like you never use the data for yourself, right? Data disposal, again, we just talked about that. And then adhere to privacy laws. So example, if there is a HIPAA law or something like that in place, you have to adhere to it if you're working in that for that business at that time, right? Comprehensive documentation. So I've done plenty of videos on reports and stuff like that using Ghostwriter and all this other stuff. You need to be very comprehensive. Your report should be very comprehensive. And one thing I'll say is what I usually do is I have way too much information and I have to dial my report in. That's the way you should do it, versus you don't want to forget something and then it's too late. You already, because there's testing windows. You can't go back and like, let me run this again real quick. No, you're done. They gave you the windows, right? So building trust and reputation. This is huge. one thing that is better than anything is your trust and reputation. It's better than money, because people will hire you based on the word of others, and people will not hire you based on the word of others. So what's the first ethic principle? Do not harm. Okay, penetration testing versus vulnerability assessment. Easiest way to look at this: vulnerability assessment lists the vulnerabilities. Penetration test actually exploits them. This is hugely different, because if a vulnerability, for instance, on vulnerability scanners, you can see this is a Greenbone, this is OpenVOS. It says here anonymous FTP login reporting, right? It's showing that. I've seen multiple times where vulnerability reports say that, vulnerability management systems say something like that, and then you go try it, and it's not. And the reason is because vulnerability scanners are looking for something specific, maybe a reg key, maybe a KB number, maybe whatever. They're looking for something. And if it's not there, they report failure, right? And that's not the case. And so that's not always the case. So there's a lot of false positives possible. There's also, for instance, there might be something that they're saying is, hey, there's 5,000 vulnerabilities here, right? And a company looks at that and goes, oh my God, we have 5,000 of those. Yes, you might, because you have 5,000 machines, but it's one vulnerability on 5,000 machines, and it's informational, right? So you got to understand that vulnerability assessments and vulnerability reports are very different than pen test reports. You can see here, penetration test is in depth, much more in depth. Yes. All right, let's keep going. Structure of a pen test. You have your pre-engagement, right? This is where you have your rules of engagement, your non-disclosures, your all that stuff. Then you do passive recon. You start doing reconnaissance, but don't touch their stuff. You're just looking at stuff at this point. Then you do active recon. This is where you're like actually running scans on their environment, all that stuff. Then you have your, and the reason I'm going through this is we've done pen tests in a nutshell on this channel. You can go look at that. Vulnerability assessment. That's why I'm flying through this. Vulnerability assessment phase is you're taking all the information that you've got, your open source information, your recon, your all that, and you're looking for vulnerabilities. How am I going to get in, right? Then you're going to exploit those vulnerabilities, right? They actually go through exploit the vulnerabilities. Then once you're post-exploit, right, this is where you're going to start going through, and you're going to start doing privilege escalation, lateral movement. You're going to start actually trying to get into the network, like deeper into the network. Find the information, find the value, right? Sometimes when you do pen tests, they'll tell you, here's our most valuable data. And you go, okay, that's my goal. I'll try and go for that, right? Then you have your lateral movement phase. So this is like, hey, okay, we've got our initial account, we've set up persistence, we've done this, etc. Let's deep dive in now, right? Like let's start spreading and let's start gathering what we can. Then you have your proof of concept. So this is where you're creating detailed documentation and evidence of proof that you could do it, because there's nothing worse than you go, hey, we were able to take advantage of this and get into this. And you're like, okay, how? And they're like, oh, we're not going to tell you that. And I've seen pen testers that do that. They'll go, we just were able to. And you're like, well, I'm not just going to trust you. Like, I need to know how, right? And when I say I need to know how, I don't need every single step that you ran, but I need to like understand what you did, because you could just say you took over a server if you have no proof of it. So prerequisites for a pen test. You need legal authorization. We talked about that. You need your scope very clearly defined. What IPs, what subnets, what domains, etc. What are we actually doing here? Information gathering, communication channels. This is big. One thing I see sometimes is people will say, hey, what's our communication channels? And someone will be like, I don't know what you're talking about. If something happens, if I accidentally crash one of your servers, for instance, as a pen tester, who do I call at 2 a.m. to get that thing up and running? Because I don't want you coming to sue me because you lost $10 million overnight. Who do I call, right? That's emergency procedures. Testing environment, right? Maybe they have to prep by getting you a machine. Maybe they're getting you a user account, etc. Documentation and reporting. What kind of document are you expecting? What kind of report are you expecting? Is there requirements you want in the report? Are you going to do a retest after, etc.? Liability and insurance, confidentiality and data handling. This is all stuff that you need to be aware of. So this is your service agreement, your statement of work, all this stuff. And these are just all the legal documents that you need to have, right? Exact testing windows. These are really important to stick to. I've seen people get themselves in a little bit of trouble because it got ready to be 5 p.m. and they're supposed to stop at 5, and they're like, I got one more command and then I'm through this phase, and they click it and it's like 5:01. It's like, you just broke that contract. You can't be doing that stuff. Okay, then you have your technical information gathering. identification, documentation of sensitive systems. So you got to start identifying and documenting, hey, what is our critical systems? These are the ones like sometimes they'll even say just don't touch them because they're so critical that it's going to cost us a fortune. Contact information, emergency contacts, create an incident response plan. So if something goes wrong, who do I call? What do I do? How are we fixing this, right? Make sure backups are all of the systems are all in scope. What that means is make sure there's backups of every machine you touch, and don't just ask, make them show you. And the reason I say that is I've seen pen tests where they say, yeah, we have backups, and then something breaks and they don't have backups, and now it's a big problem, right? Make sure everyone is on the same page as far as what documents are required up front, because I've even been on the part where I'm hiring a pen tester and I've asked for specific documents that's not normal for them. And they've said, yeah, I guess we can do that, right? And then procedures for handling data. If I do find sensitive data, how do I get it to you? What are we doing, etc. Okay, required skills. I'm not even going to go through this too much because what they're talking about here is should be pretty well known. First, you need to know IT, right? It says here that while penetration testers must understand all these components and interactions to identify vulnerabilities and effectively, it's not realistic. That's true, right? It is not realistic to know everything. Nobody does. But what matters is having the ability to learn quickly, understanding how they work together, fundamental knowledge of spanning network operating systems, web technologies, and more. This is what's missing from most people getting into pen testing. They want to skip to pen testing, but they don't want to get that fundamental knowledge of networking, operating systems, web technologies, and more, right? Then secondly, they have to think outside the box. I see all the time where people are like, okay, what do I do next? How do I enumerate? I get that all the time, right? How do I laterally move? How do I privilege escalate? If you're just going through something like a checklist that other people have given you, you're not going to be a pen tester very, very long, or you're not going to be very good, I should say. You need to be able to think critically and think, how could I use this and how could I take advantage of this, and etc. And that's why a lot of pen testers now are just they just are doing checklists. It's not really that great of a pen test. Cyber is always evolving, so you have to keep up on all things new. And this is one of the reasons why I don't full-time pen test anymore, is because I don't want to do this full-time. It is exhausting, right? And then you have to know what could potentially damage something. So that's why you ask the right questions in the right times. Know the operating systems, know security concepts, right? Including authentication mechanisms, encryption, access control, security protocols, blah, blah. You obviously need to know vulnerabilities, web technologies, right? You have to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You have to at least know them, right? You have to know what's going on, or else you have a chance of breaking something and not even knowing that you did it, right? Documentation, communication. I've seen people that are really good at pen testing and really bad at communicating. And that's really hard, because it's like, I have to communicate this to you, but you don't understand what I'm saying. That's hard. Problem solving, that's all cybersecurity is problem solving. So you should already be there. Continuous learning. I see people all the time. They get to a certain level. They're now in that field, whatever it is, cybersecurity, blue team, red team, etc. And they go, I'm here. And then they drop off. You have to continue learning, or you're going to get left behind. It's just a matter of time. Methodologies and frameworks. You can use the PTES, the Penetration Testing Execution Standards. You can use the Technical Guide to Information Security, which is NIST. You can use the OWASP Top 10, the MITRE ATT&CK Framework. You can use all these different things, right? And use your own methodology, whatever, as long as you're using a repeatable methodology. And the reason I say that is because you don't want to just be winging it and trying to do a pen test for one person, and then next week it's for a different person, etc., and it's different every single time. You don't want to do a checklist, but you also want to make sure you're not missing things, because if I check this here and the other company I forget to check it, that's on me. You need to have a repeatable process for it, right? Exactly. Here you go. Developing your personal methodology. So you need to have your own methodology. An example here they use is specializing in healthcare systems. They are specifically have a methodology for HIPAA requirements. That's something that you should start looking into if you're going to be working in a certain industry, or you're already working in an industry, etc. Those are things to keep in mind. Web app pen tester, right? You should know there's 3 typical layers, right? Front end, back end, and database. Usually you hear developers say, I'm a front end developer, I'm a full stack developer, etc. That's what they're talking about. Common web app go look at the OWASP top 10 if you aren't familiar with it. You should be using Burp Suite Professional. You can use Zap, but you should be using something like Burp Suite Pro. And I don't even know why they have this in here, because they don't talk about tools at all, and then they just randomly kind of throw in Burp Suite. But you should know how to use basic security tools if you're going to be a pen tester. That's basically what they're saying. You shouldn't have to tell you that. Network security testing, right? This is some of the things that they're looking for: misconfigured services, unpatched systems, etc., etc. They have network mapping tools like Nmap, which literally stands for network map, vulnerability scanners, exploitation frameworks, packet analysis tools, password cracking tools. These are all just tools. And, I don't understand why they're just listing random tools here, just to give you some guidance, I guess, some examples, but you're not going to learn those on this. So if you don't know these types of tools and this infrastructure and that type of stuff, start learning. This is how you're going to get into it, right? Reliance on automated scanning tools. Yes, rushing and reliance on automated scanning is one of the biggest problems. Don't rush through. That's why you have a methodology, because you know how long stuff's going to take. You've done this a million times. And if you are basically rushing or using automation and going, automated, that'll work, and then I go do something else, that's going to be a problem. Because if you're automating, I'm not saying don't automate some stuff, but if you automate like your entire test, like sometimes you'll see people selling automated pen tests. Why would I hire you if I can automate the entire test? That means you don't bring the value. There's no value in what you're doing. So understand that if it's automated, you're missing a lot of nuance, and that's why automation can't take over pen testing at this point. Key differences from penetration testing for cloud security testing. The big key difference here is you can't touch AWS, Azure, and GCP servers, meaning, yes, I can try to, for one, I need to get authorization, but I can try to mess with the app and like try and take over the app and everything like that. But the big thing is I can't hack through into their network infrastructure and start spreading into AWS data center, right? That's a huge problem. But I can do that to your company if that's what you're hiring me to do, right? So what you're looking for here is configuration assessments, looking for flaws in the application, the way it's set up, looking for flaws in maybe privileged access, that type of stuff. But you're not really looking, privilege escalation opportunities, insecure APIs, that type of stuff. You're not really looking at the infrastructure part, unless you have explicit authorization from AWS and et cetera. But that's typically what you're looking for. And then you can see here they have AWS Inspector, Azure Security Center, Cloud Exploit, Scout Suite, all that stuff. Those are all great. But again, it's more of a security assessment here because you can't touch the underlying infrastructure. Not that you even need to, but I'm just saying you're not going to. An example is Entra ID, right? Entra AD, excuse me. Entra AD, it's sitting somewhere on a server somewhere, but it's a cloud-based system. So if I get access to your Entra AD, I have access to everything because I just took over your Active Directory. But am I going to try to pivot onto the actual Azure server that Entra ID console is sitting on? No, that doesn't make any sense in that context. So what does IAM stand for? Identity and Access Management. All right, and physical security tests. You don't really see these as much anymore. You still see them for sure, but I mean, like from a pen tester perspective, a lot of times pen testers, you're either an expert or you're going to hire someone for physical security. But you can see it's exactly what it sounds like. You're trying to actually get into the company, into the building, into a computer, into whatever, right? And you might usually bring a pen tester with you so that like you guys get in and the pen tester can plug into a computer and start working, etc. But usually what they're looking for is they're looking for OSINT to start looking at the building. Usually you can go on like Google Maps and even just see the buildings nowadays and stuff like that. Social engineering, right? I'm going to lockpick. I'm going to try to actually just walk through and talk to the person, etc. All that stuff. You definitely need a get out of jail free card for this, because if you're copying like an RFID card, again, it comes down to ethical disclosure and disposal, because if I copy your RFID card to scan through a badge and then test is over, you have to be 100% confident that I deleted that, right? How are you confident in that? Well, you got to hope I have ethics, right? What technique is used for the initial phase? And that's OSINT. Social engineering. So this is where you're trying to trick people, right? You're trying to, You ever heard the term, or not term, excuse me? You ever heard like you can get anywhere if you have like a construction hat and a ladder? I don't know if you've ever heard that, but people say that because it's true. A lot of times, if you just have a ladder and like a construction hat or something, or a work vest or whatever, you can walk right into buildings because they're usually like, oh, this person's trying to work on something. Let me help them. They'll open the door, they'll etc. So you can get social engineer your way through. You can call somebody and say, hey, I need to, reset my password. It's an emergency. I've got this client on the phone. I'm about to lose $1 million sale. And they're like, oh crap, let me reset the password for you. Those are all things that you can talk about as social engineering, right? You have phishing, you have pretexting, fabricating scenario to obtain information, baiting exploits human curiosity. This is dropping USB sticks and stuff like that. Conducting social engineering assessments. You do your recon, you do your OSINT, you target the environment, and then there you go. One of the things here with ethics is you really want to be careful with your ethics here because some people will overstep, in my opinion. An example would be, I don't want to use your children against you or something like that. Like, will you click on a link because I mentioned your children and the school they go to or something? Yes. Is that kind of messed up? Yeah. It's kind of messed up. So I wouldn't do that necessarily. All right. Mobile security. Back to where we're talking about. So mobile security testing, right, is essentially for business today, particularly one who relies heavily on mobile devices. Mobile devices often handle sensitive company. So you notice they're talking about mobile security testing, not mobile OS penetration testing. So what they're talking about is assessing the mobile security of your company, not actually trying to break into this phone necessarily. So you have your BYOD policies. Companies need to secure your own devices, data breach costs, remote work revolution, blah, blah. All they're saying is, what can we do to protect your device? An example would be using something like Intune or something like that, where, hey, if something happens, like a data breach, do you have a way to wipe the phone immediately? Do you have a way to report it as lost or stolen? Do you have a process? Is it encrypted? Like, we're trying to assess, are there flaws in your mobile device policy? And that's pretty much what they're talking about here, right? You can see here, they're talking about the apps themselves. You guys set up a proper testing environment. If you guys have never messed with Android debug or anything like that, basically what they're saying is, hey, you're going to have to reverse engineer a lot of these apps because that's just kind of what it is, right? So if your company's building apps, someone's got to either reverse engineer them, or usually it's part of the security process when they're building the apps that they have to be tested before they can ever be sent out. And then you may do an annual test or something like that where you're having them tested. But somebody has to break them down, right? You can see they're breaking it down. They're static analysis. So they're actually looking at the code of the app, right? And then you can see there's dynamic analysis where they're actually analyzing it in real time. Can I put this app on your phone? Like if I install a Watchdog app or something like that on your phone, does your company notice, right? Maybe, maybe not. So can I watch what you're doing and you're on the company network? Awesome. Thank you. Right? iOS security specific. And then you can see, excuse me, these are the common mobile security vulnerabilities, which is basically, hey, yeah, it can be any sort of web app vulnerabilities, and the reason for that is it's coded the same as a web app, just different device, right? But you can see insecure data storage, when sensitive information is stored in plain text. This happens a lot more in mobile phones now than web apps, and the reason is mobile phones are kind of just a little bit behind in web apps, and it's kind of like back when the internet started, like everybody just had unencrypted text and didn't know it. And now people are getting savvy to it and things are progressing and et cetera. And mobile is doing the same thing. So weak network security, client-side injection, all that stuff. So this is all mobile security. One thing I'll say is the physical security, the mobile security, the web app pen testing, infrastructure, these are all different fields. So what I mean by that is, don't look at this and go, well, I have to learn all this. You don't have to learn all this. They're different fields. You learn the one that you like, right? Reverse engineering, this is taking something, an app usually, or not even just an app, but something, a program, an application, operating system, whatever, and you're reverse engineering it. You're decompiling it backwards, meaning you're going to say, hey, you have to have a deep understanding of programming language, right? But you're going to look at basically, hey, I'm going to take this program, I'm going to run it probably, see what it does, and then I'm going to start reverse engineering how it's doing that stuff, right? I'm going to build it backwards. And so this is usually done, demands a comprehensive understanding of computing architecture, assembly language, intricate mechanisms. Yes, it is very hard to reverse engineer because a lot of times you have to really know the systems in and out, because you're having to assume, when I push this button and that happens, I know exactly what that computer did internally, and I know what it did at a fundamental level to make it do that, so I can assume that that line of code goes here, etc. And you can see this is them disassembling a malware sample. So they're actually taking malware and they're disassembling it, and you can see there's actually times where you have to know exact memories and everything else, exact memory location, everything. It's very complex. Reverse engineering is very complex. That in itself is its own field, in my opinion. I don't know many pen testers that are also doing malware analysis and reverse engineering. I know pen testers that dabble in that and like enjoy it, but I'm not going to hire a pen tester for this. I'm going to hire someone that specializes in it. If I have like a serious consideration or concern, I might hire a pen tester if it's like a small malware analysis or something. But utilization of penetration testing results. Here's the big one. So one of the big things you see a lot is clear description of technical details. A lot of times I see people when they do security pen test reports, the number one thing I see the problem with it is it's too technical. The descriptions are not clear, they're very technical, or they're out of the box. So like an example would be technical finding right here, description. By responding to LLMNR, NBT, NS, network traffic, adversaries may spoof an authoritative source. That's great for the security person that's going to read this, because they'll know what that means, right? LLMNR, it's the old protocol that allows you to listen in. So they're using responders, what they're saying. And so that's great. What they're saying here is all this blah, blah, bull crap, right? If I'm a strategic C-level executive and I don't know any of that wording, how do I use this? Just go, oh, it's a 9.5. We got to fix that. Can I make a really good strategic decision based on that? Probably not. So make sure it makes sense. And I know they're using this as an example and they think this might be good. In my opinion, it's not, because this is so much detail that an executive doesn't need. In my opinion, there should be two reports. There should be one for your security professionals to actually fix, and you can have all this detail. And there should be one that is very executive level that explains in true layman's terms what the severity of each vulnerability is and what the business impact is. So explain the potential consequences, right? And explain it in terms that the business understands. If the business has told you in their goals, they're concerned with financial risk, lay it out in financial risk. This is a risk of X server that maybe costs you $10 million an hour to operate. The risk is that will go down. Even restoring from backups, you're looking at maybe 10 hours. That's $100 million, right? Try and break it down into financial risk for them, a business impact analysis. You may not have all that information, but ask the right questions and you can get pretty close. Risk rating, assign clear risk ratings. This is where you see a lot of people screw up too, right? CVSS score, and they just did 9.5. Is that just based on the CVSS score that this vulnerability came out with? Because did you add any business impact or any business information in there to evaluate that? Meaning, okay, all this is a 9.5 based on the CVSS score from whatever vulnerability site you found. Okay, that's great. But did you add in context, it's a critical server for the company? Well, now it's a 10 because it's a 9.5 vulnerability flat out. But it's a critical server for the company that if it goes down, it's a huge risk, and it's external, it's a 10. You got to fix it today, right? But let's say it's internal, it's a segregated network, and it has no important information on it. That's not a 9.5. That's like a 6. Like let's start being realistic, right? Now, LLMNR will allow you to actually listen in and get passwords, so it's more important, but you get what I'm saying. So then practical remediation guidance. This is one I see a lot, is I see people give like, here's a snippet of how you can fix it. And it's because what they want you to do is hire them to come in and fix it. That's their next like sales pitch. Well, I don't believe in that. I believe, yes, you can hire me to come fix it, but I'm still going to give you good guidance on how to fix it. Maybe I'm not going to write out every detail, but I'm going to give you, here's documentation, here's tooling, here's remediation steps, here's things like that. And I think that's something that people will come back and hire you again and again and again if you do it properly. Because if you just say, hey, remediation is harden your security posture, and then you're like, hey, well, if you hire us, we can come do it, I'm going to be like, screw these guys, I'm not doing that, right? Verification and follow-up. So a lot of times there's retesting. A lot of times people will say, hey, I'll retest all the criticals for you in 90 days. I'll give you 90 days to fix them, and then I'll retest. The reason they do this is because it then comes off the report, and then now compliance isn't a problem. So daily routine. So what's the day of a life like? Well, this is just all made up. I don't know why they do this. Apparently it's blending meticulous planning with high-stakes execution. This is just AI written or something. What's the routine look like? I'll just tell you now. The routine is difficult. It's difficult because you have to maintain, you have to stay up to date on things. It's for continuous learners. It's not necessarily for somebody that just wants to kind of get in and then just kind of do their thing. It is for continuous learners, creative people, people that have passion in the industry and are interested in this long term. Most people do pen testing short term, and then they move on to something else because it is stressful and intense. Not saying you can't do it, but just understand it is a difficult lifestyle, and you have to be passionate about it. If you're not passionate about it, you're going to be probably mediocre at your job. There's mediocre pen testers, there's mediocre everything. So is it a bad thing? Not necessarily. It's just something that does happen. All right. Now, penetration testing as a profession, there are plenty of pen testers. The biggest thing is junior pen testers. It's trying to find a unicorn. Yeah, that's true. The reason is because a lot of people are missing fundamentals. So people trying to get in, they see a junior level pen tester role, and they think that means entry level, like I can come out of college. No, it means you have years of experience in IT, and you're trying to transition it into pen testing. Right? There's a big difference. You should have a background in IT, start in IT, and then work your way into security. Security is a specialization of pen testing. You can't be a surgeon without being a doctor first, right? Same thing here. So benefits and challenges, intellectual stimulation, continuous learning, high salaries. It does pay well, right? There's a lot of high salaries in cybersecurity, but understand it comes with a cost. Stress is the cost, right? So understand there's stress, work, a lot of work. After hours work, multiple hours, right? It's a lot of difficult times to basically say, we're putting all of our risk on your shoulders. Don't fold, right? So understand that, and understand that security as a whole is a tough job to be in, but it's a very, very, very rewarding one if you do it right. So hopefully this helps you guys. I know this was a long box for something that really you could have just skimmed through and clicked next, but I really want to add value to you guys, and rather than just do that, if you pay attention, watch, you might have questions, you might have things that you could add or think that I left out, but hopefully this helps you guys. Thanks, guys.